Hype and the fear of missing out are two massive things that drive people to make choices they otherwise wouldn't normally do. LOL! For example, people spending thousands of dollars on cards thinking that they will be good because of pure online speculation, and the value of those cards to plummet heavily. That is what we'll be looking at here today, as we delve into some of the most hype cards in Pokemon history that then crashed and burned spectacularly. Let's go. Now this pains me to say because I've always been a Zoroark believer. I think the card itself is so cool and it's always had the tools it's needed to do well, but it could never truly get itself over the line and become as good as it really should have been. Zoroark has the ability Phantom Transformation, which lets you discard Zoroark and all cards attached to it, and then put a stage 1 from your discard pile in its place instead. This would allow you to run a medley of powerful stage 1 attackers, without having to run the normal, necessary basic Pokemon to get them into play. For example, you could transform into Flapple from Evolving Skies, which has the Acid Mucus attack, which does 50 for each one of your opponent's Pokemon in play that has an ability. And that added up quite fast. Or you could transform into Appleton, which obliterated Lugia V-Star decks, with its thick Mucus attack, which did 70 for each special energy your opponent had attached, which for Lugia decks was often 4 or higher, meaning Appleton would immediately get to work. Or how about Martiena, which would attack for free if your opponent had a VMAX Pokemon in play, and it did 160 damage too, which would one-hit KO a Mew VMAX with weakness, which is absolutely incredible all things considered. And once you got your opponent to 1 prize card left, you could transform into Slowbro, which would use Twilight Inspiration to take 2 prize cards quickly, closing the game out. Later on in Zoroark's lifespan, you even had Reversal Energy 2, a card that seems pretty much made for Zoroark, since it provided the evolution Pokemon it was attached to 3 energy that could be whatever colour you wanted, as long as you were behind on prize cards. This would open up the door to cards like Sea Titan and Drifloon too. So with these seemingly amazing tools at Zoroark's disposal, what went so wrong for it to never see any success? Well, I think there were 2 reasons why Zoroark failed. The first was that Zoroark needed to discard all cards attached to it when you used its ability. This was a downright killer. This means you couldn't preemptively attach your energies to Zoroark to use later on. This would mean drawing into energies in the early game was a death sentence, because you couldn't attach them until you had the right attacker in the discard pile ready to go. Sad times. The next thing, however, was the main reason for Zoroark's demise, and it was all due to this little geezer right here. Yep, Lost Box decks would run amok through Zoroark. The combination of Cramorant's early pressure in the early game for very little investment too, and then Sableye coming in the late game spreading 12 damage counters was just way too much for Zoroark decks to deal with, since Lost Mine would start to KO Bench Zorua and removing attacking threats at the same time. And what made it even worse for Zoroark is that there was never really a good stage 1 for them to use against Lost Box. You see, ideally you would want something that is immune to effects of attacks, so Lost Mine couldn't target it, of which no stage 1s existed, or you'd want something that had a ton of HP and was capable of taking multiple prize turns, either by spreading damage or effects of attacks again, which unfortunately no stage 1s really fit the bill. The silver lining for Zoroark though is that it's still technically in format, meaning there is a world in which Clefable from 151 can help swing the Lost Box matchup, since its more moon attack would take an extra prize card if it KOs something. And while 50 damage seems low, you could use it with Town Store or Arven to search out Cleansing Gloves, meaning you could now one-hit KO Sableye and Comfey for 2 prize cards. So maybe, just maybe, Zoroark has enough time to pull this one back. One card that hasn't got any time to pull it back though is Reshiram, and this had the community in pieces when it was revealed. People thought the format was about to crumble into nothing more than Reshiram mirror matches. What made everyone so terrified? Well, Fabled Firebolts did a table-shattering 270 damage, since it would let you discard up to 3 fire or lightning energy from your bench Pokemon, and you did 90 for each one you did. At a time where meta-relevant threats only really had 270 HP, this was a very attractive attacker. And the GX attack, Cross Break, was equally as silly, since it allowed you to do a 170 damage snipe in a format where Tapu Lele and a Denate were both format staples, meaning this was pretty much a 3-2 prize card whenever you could pull it off. However, if you played End Resolve this turn, which we will cover later, you actually did 2 170 damage snipes, which is absurd. Just think about that for a second. 2 170 damage snipes. That would be good now. A potential 4 prize card attack, meaning you only had to take 1 2 prize KO with Fabled Firebolt to win. How are we going to accelerate these energies after we attack them? Well, Tapu Koko Prism Star with its ability Dance of the Ancients would let you grab 2 lightning energy from your discard pile and attach them to 2 of your bench Pokemon. That works pretty well. And then Welder would have let you attach 2 fire energies from your hand to one of your Pokemon, and then you even got to draw 3 cards afterwards. Not bad. End Resolve was another option, very high risk, but definitely worth it if you pulled it off, since it would discard the top 6 cards of your deck, but if any of those were energy cards, you could attach them to one of your bench dragon types. So in theory, this had a potential to get 6 energy into play in one turn. But it also had the chance to mill 6 cards from your deck for no reason. Risky. Normally this would let Reshiram players stream big KOs. So if it was possible to stream these energies, and you were one-hitting everything in your path, how did Reshiram fall off harder than Coyote chasing the Roadrunner? Well, first of all, it was extremely hard to set up, since you couldn't dance to the Ancients to the active, meaning getting that lightning energy attached really was quite difficult. You had to rely on cards like Tag Switch, which wasn't the most reliable, since you didn't have a ton of draw in this deck to begin with. The reliance on these sort of cards made the deck a lot less consistent as you would initially like, and the reliance on End Resolve was brutal. So brutal in fact that a ton of Reshiram players opted to not even play the card to begin with, meaning you could never use Cross Break for full effectiveness, and that says a lot when you consider how crazy that GX attack really was. The main killer for Reshiram though was not being able to discard energies from itself to power up the damage. This meant when your active Pokemon eventually did get KO'd, you were normally scrambling to get a new one set up and enough energy on the bench for you to start swinging for big damage again. Also, being capped at 270 wasn't the greatest number, since you couldn't one-shot ADP, which was in the same set and was immediately taking up meta share, faster than a Choice Scarf Regieleki, meaning Reshiram players now had to also play some damage modifiers like Choice Band, which again watered down the consistency of this deck, which was already not that consistent to begin with. And the deck quickly fell into irrelevancy. Another deck that had massive preset hype launch that relied on heavy hitting attacks was Primal Kyogre EX. Now all the way back in 2014, damage and HP numbers were much lower, so don't let that 150 damage number fool you. 150 damage to the active and then 30 to all your opponents bench EX was a ridiculous attack at the time, since 180 was the magic number, since that would KO basic EX Pokemon like Seismitoad and Yveltal in one hit. So the initial 150 would be clearing the way of pretty much all threats after a 30 damage snipe. And for other Mega Pokemon, just use Tidal Storm again, and the extra 60 damage would just be enough to flood the board. See what I did there? Water, tides, flooding, eh? Come on, give us a like for that. But a 4 energy cost is pretty massive, make no mistake about it. How are players planning on getting those energies attached to our big killer fish? Well, Primal Kyogre had the Alpha Growth Ancient trait, which lets you attach 1 more energy from your hand to Kyogre immediately after your turn attachment. So as long as you had 2 energies in your hand when you went to turn attach, you could attach the second one too. So bingo, we have our perfect little fishy boy who is ready to dominate the format with its combination of heavy, active damage and sniping too. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, Alpha Growth was good. It was actually still impossible to get the turn to attack off. You see, you needed to have a Kyogre EX in play first, which was fine, it was just a basic. But then turn 2, you'd have to find a Spirit Link so you could evolve without ending your turn. But even then, it was impossible to get the turn to attack, since even with Alpha Growth, you could never get to 4 energy in a turn, at least straight away on release. When Roaring Skies came out, you then had Mega Turbo, which made it possible, but that was another couple sets away. But missing a turn to attack wasn't the end of the world, because in this format, things were a lot slower, and you had 240 HP too, so you really wasn't going to go anywhere anytime soon. The worst bit about Primal Kyogre was the fact that it moved 2 energy away from itself every time it attacked. This was so counter-synergistic for the deck, since this would be very good if you were often getting KO'd every turn, because you could just move the energies away to your next attacker and keep it moving. But you wasn't getting KO'd every turn. You had 240 HP. This actually made it even harder, because if you wanted to attack again, you would have to find another 2 energy. And you have to find them at the exact same time too, since Alpha Growth would only let you attach these at the same time, meaning you couldn't like attach one for turn, play a Professor Sycamore, and then attach the next one. And it was this very frustrating matter of events that saw Kyogre quickly fade into darkness to never be seen again. One deck that loved being in the darkness though was Darkrai Umbreon Tag Team. And this was a deck that the player base really got behind and really went to the dark side in the run up to Unified Minds releasing. Trust me when I say Darkbox was hyped to high heaven so much. And it wasn't hard to see why, in all honesty. Darkrai Tag Team's GX attack Pale Moon would auto KO your opponent's Pokemon if you had 6 energy attack, and it would stop them from playing any trainer cards on their hand next turn. I think this quite honestly has the potential of being the best attack ever printed. Do you know how mad that is? Potentially taking 3 prize cards in one turn and stopping your opponent from playing trainers too. This basically read, win the game if you pulled this GX attack off, let's be honest. Its normal attack wasn't too bad either, doing 150 damage to the active and a 60 snipe to a bench EX or GX too. Mega Sableye Tyranitar was shaping up to be Darkrai's running mate, with its Greedy Crush attack doing 210 damage for 5 energy. That sounds pretty awful, right? Until you read the extra text that says, if this attack KOs an EX or a GX, you get to take 1 extra prize card. And while 210 damage was low, you wasn't really going to get to any tag teams with that number. The Dene was in format and every deck pretty much played it, and it only had 160 HP too. So what this attack really read was, take 3 prizes on your opponent's Dene GX. Meaning realistically that if you was a budding Darkbox player, all you have to do is Greedy Crush KO a Dene and use Pale Moon for the last 3 prizes, and you could win the turn into attacks. We even had Silvally GX to help us out drawing cards, since it let you draw till you had 5 cards in your hand, think of the barrel. So how are we getting 6 energy onto a Darkrai and 6 energy onto Tyranitar then? That sounds like a lot. Well, Weavile GX helps out with that, with its Shadow Connection ability that would let you move around dark energies across the board, making transitioning between attackers very easy. But while this was very good, this didn't actually help us get extra energy into play though. So how are we doing that? Well, one option was Lost Thunder Naganadel, which with its charging up ability would let you grab 1 energy from the discard pile and attach it to the Naganadel, getting 1 extra energy per turn. And this also opened the door for you to play B-String, which would let you get another 2 energies into play too. Very nice. But the main way we would accelerate energy in playing was with the tag team supporter Red and Blue. This supporter would let you evolve one of your Pokemon into a GX, so pretty much Weavile or Silvally, and then you would discard 2 cards from your hand. But if you did, you also got to attach 2 basic energies from your deck to that Pokemon when you evolved them. And this was the main explosive way we were going to get energies into play. And when it worked, oh boy, it was awesome. Except it rarely did. The problem was you had to already play a lot of energies in your deck to make this work, but you also needed to play 3 stage 1s all with different basics. This meant the deck space for consistency cards was very low. Couple that with the fact that other decks were just getting faster and faster, and once Darkbox had its top 16 finish at Worlds, which is the highest in this video to be fair, it struggled to make any other dents in the competitive metagame. But the best bit was about Darkbox in my opinion is that every set there would be something new to try, something new in theory that would make Darkbox better and better. So everyone would clamber to try again, and every time they would clamber to try again, you would fall flat on your face. Sad times. Speaking of another archetype that fell straight on its face, it'd be very hard not to have Rayquaza VMAX in this video. Rayquaza VMAX had the attack Max Burst, which should let you discard any amount of basic fire energy or lightning energy from the Rayquaza, and you did 80 for each one you discarded. These type of attacks have seen a ton of success in the past, including one from another Rayquaza, funnily enough, Rayquaza EX, which had the exact same attack, but this time it had a 60 multiplier instead of 80. And this Rayquaza was a massive metagame threat, being paired with either Ember or Electric. And it's funny that we actually mentioned electric, because in Evolving Skies, electric kinda got a reprint, since Fluffy had the same ability, Dynamotor, which let you attach a lightning energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. So the idea is you get as many Fluffy out as possible and use Dynamotor so your Rayquaza can swing with massive damage. Easy, right? Rayquaza even had an ability that let you discard your hand and draw 3 cards, proving for a massive consistency boost. And even in preset testing, Rayquaza was shining bright. And then it released, and then it quickly crashed and burned. It immediately stopped getting good results, and it was for one very easy to spot reason. The damage multiplier on Rayquaza just wasn't high enough. You see, while 80 damage for each energy sounds good, when you compare it to Ultra Necrozma from a few years ago, you'll quickly notice something. The damage between Max Burst and Photon Geyser hasn't changed. So while Ultra Necrozma was a very good damage dealer back in the day, since it only had to really worry about hitting 210 damage most of the time, which was either 3-8 Psychic Energy or 2 in a Choice Band, that was very good. But Rayquaza has to hit as high as 330 HP, which was 5 Lightning or 4 and a Vitality or Choice Belt. That is an insane difference, especially when you consider you're attaching energies in the same way via Dynamotor or a stage 1 Pokemon that would attach energy from the discard pile. This meant Rayquaza players out the gate had to start playing copies of Rose to try and get to that fabled 5 lightning energy in play, which was very costly since it discarded your hand in the process, meaning you were now relying on the Zor Pulse to get in the game, and that is a scary place to be, all things considered. This culminated in one of the most spectacular failures of all time, but not the biggest failure of all time. That crown could be given to Mega Tyranitar EX. This card was released in the Ancient Origins expansion, and the player base were losing their mind at this absolutely unheard of amount of damage. Mega Tyranitar's attack, which was very aptly named Destroyer King, did 110 damage and then 60 for each damage counter on your opponent's active. And at the time, 180 to 220 damage was the relevant number. So all you really had to do was have 2 prior damage counters in play and you would nuke everything into oblivion. The Charizard Lounge, which was a huge and well respected content creator at the time, had this as his best card in the set, passing up cards like Hex Maniac, Vespiquen and Giratina EX, all which saw tippy top high tier play. So it's safe to say the player base was absolutely enamored with Mega Titar. But trust me when I say this card did absolutely nothing in the competitive meta game. How could everyone be so wrong? Well, the 4 energy attack cost really didn't help. This meant you were relying on using Oblivion Ring Yveltal in the early game to get energies into play, and this took turns of tempo away from you. Being a Mega Evolution really didn't help too, since you'd have to find your Spirit Link to evolve up without losing your turn. And this was at a time where Giratina EX from the same set, funnily enough, with its Chaos Wheel attack, would lock you from playing tool cards, and so would Seismitoad EX's Quaking Punch too, meaning it could get very hard for you to get the big Tyranitar out. And all of that in combination with needing prior damage in play once you did get your Mega Tyranitar out really put the nail in the coffin for Mega Tyranitar. It was a very exciting time for the TCG when fairy types were introduced back in the XY day. The last time we had a new type added was all the way back in Dragons Exalted, and our old friend Rayquaza EX, funnily enough, was a powerhouse right out of the gate. So it wasn't a lot to think that fairies would be a heavy hitter too. Baby Exernius provided some of the best energy acceleration I've ever seen via Geomancy on a basic Pokemon that had high HP too. Aromatease let you move around fairy energy, which we know is a very good effect to have, since you could maneuver around your attackers and even heal off damage with Max Potion too. Fairy Garden also gave you a free retreat cost. So with all this support, how could fairies flop? Well, it was looking good right up until we piled all the energies onto our main attacker, Xerneas EX, and then it all crumbled. On face value, it doesn't look that bad, right? You know, good HP, access to the bench via breakthrough, and a heavy hitting attack, X-Blast doing 140. This sounds good, right? Wrong. You see, 140 damage was an awful number. Even with Muscle Band, you wasn't one-shotting anything relevant, like Virizion, Genesect, or the real gut puncher Yveltal EX, which was in the same set and went to rule the metagame in a dangerous way afterwards, all while fairies got left in the dust. People were going mad for Leafeon GX when it released. You see, in 2 turns you could do something magical, and that was turn this one Eevee into a Leafeon and then get 3 Decidueye GX out. In play, very easy. How has this happened then? Well, you see, Eevee first of all had the energy evolution ability that would let you evolve straight into an evolution of the same type as a basic energy you attach to it. So that means turn 1 you could get your Leafeon GX out, very easy, happy days. After that you could use Granbloom GX, which would let you evolve all your bench Pokemon by 1 stage. And the player base were very quick to realise you could use this to turbo getting some Decidueye GX out, since the player base already knew this was a very strong card, with its Feather Arrow ability letting you put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So as long as you had 1 Eevee and a basic energy and a Bridget, you could end your first turn with a Leafeon GX in the active and 3 Dartrix out. Then all you had to do next turn was just evolve your Dartrix one more time and boom! You had this terrifying board state. Leafeon even had an ability that would heal 60 damage when it was in the active spot, making those Decidueyes even more tanky. And while this sounds amazing on paper, in reality having to jam 4 Eevee, 3 Leafeon, 4 Rowlet, 4 Dartrix and 4 Decidueye really clogged up the deck, making for a seemingly easy combo to pull off to be a pretty much impossible one, unfortunately, and one of the most hyped decks I've ever seen died off. Now this one is very recent, so I remember it very clearly, and this involved some people spending up to thousands of pounds or dollars thinking they were about to have a massive advantage in the meta game, only for the archetype in question to fall flat on its face and become an absolute non-factor. You see, when Paldea Evolve released, some people were quick to cotton on that this Drifloon with a Bravery Charm attached would now have 120 HP. This meant if you was to have 110 damage on it, its Balloon Blast attack would now swing for a colossal 330 damage. This was perfectly capable of KOing everything in format, including Mew VMAX and Lugia V-Star, 2 big threats at the time, all with a 1 prize Pokemon. This sounds good, but how would we get exactly 110 damage on it? Well, Gardevoir EX was the perfect partner, since its Psychic Embrace ability would put 2 damage counters on your Psychic Pokemon for each Psychic Energy you attach to it from the discard pile. Eureka! So that means if you was to put 5 energy onto Drifloon via Psychic Embrace, the Drifloon would now have 100 damage on, and wait, what? 100 damage? Well, that means you'd only be swinging for 300. And while that's still pretty good, it doesn't quite reach Mew VMAX, which was still very prevalent. And you can't knock yourself out with Psychic Embrace, so how do we fix this? You see, this is how people lost their money. You see, people realised that you could use the very expensive Champions Festival promo card, since it would work perfect here. Since you would put 5 energies onto the Drifloon like normal, giving you 100 damage on it. Then you would activate Champions Festival, heal 10, bringing it down to 90 damage, giving you that extra 10 you needed to get to that magic 110 damage, making this Drifloon eject anything out the way. And this sounded way too good to be true. This little common 1 prize attacking Pokemon dealing 330 damage in a very easy way too. And this is what made the player base go absolutely wild. Problem is, Champions Festival is only given out to Worlds competitors from 2013 through to 2022. So they were very limited. And this made them very expensive, even before the hype. And now people were looking to hoover them up in mass. This caused the price to raise to silly levels. I even saw English copies going for as high as £200 a pop. People really thought Drifloon Gardevoir was going to be the new best deck in format. Except Drifloon Gardevoir did not take off at all. You see, in the grand scheme of things, Gardevoir really didn't need this package of Drifloon, Bravery Charm and Champions Festival, since Brainwave Gardevoir with a reversal energy, which was in the same set by the way, would reach 230 damage anyways, just fine, meaning you didn't have to add all this new clunk to your deck. And those Champions Festivals became really bad purchases, as the Gardevoir archetype just sort of went on and moved forward without them being played. And people that jumped on that hype train, spending loads of money in the process, had to sit by and watch it all happen. But one funny thing about this story is that TPCI were watching, and they didn't want this to ever happen again. Exclusive promo cards becoming meta relevant, because this was always going to happen. They were always going to be very expensive if this situation was to happen again. And this forced them to change the world's promo from Champions Festival to something else that has very, very little use. So hopefully we'll never see this scenario happen again. But how do we top people spending thousands of pounds though? How about people genuinely thinking cards were gonna get banned? You see, all the way back when Call of Legends was getting ready to release, the player base was in a massive state of panic. You see, while Call of Legends had the best energy cards ever printed in my opinion, and they also had some very gorgeous shiny legendary Pokemon, it wasn't those that had the player base concerned. It was a lowly little stadium card of all things, Lost World. You see, this gave players an alternate win condition, and it said while this stadium is in play, if your opponent has 6 or more Pokemon in their lost zone, you can just choose to win the game. Yep, pretty simple, right? Just get Pokemon into your opponent's lost zone and then you can win. The only problem with this is it's a very specific way to play the game, and there wasn't many ways for you to force your opponent to put Pokemon into their lost zone. The best way by far was Gengar Prime. Gengar Prime had the Hurl into Darkness attack that let you look at your opponent's hand, and for each Psychic Energy you had attached, you could put any number of Pokemon you find there into the lost zone. This meant, in theory, if you had 6 Pokemon in your opponent's hand and 6 energy attached, you could put them all in the lost zone and then choose to use Lost World next turn to win. And if you wanted to get offensive, you could use Curse Drop, which let you put 4 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. And then eventually, if you ever KO'd something, Gengar's Poke Power would pop, which means you would put the KO Pokemon into the lost zone instead of the discard pile. Pretty nice. You could even force your opponent to have Pokemon in their hand by playing Seeker first, which would force both players to pick up one Pokemon and put it in their hand, meaning you could immediately use Hurl into Darkness and just target whatever Pokemon your opponent put in their hand via Seeker. And since you wasn't ever really taking prize cards, since you were just using Hurl of Darkness every turn, you could use Twins over and over and over again, which let you search your deck for 2 cards as long as you were behind on prize cards, put them straight in your hand. Pretty nice. So with all these crazy things going on for Gengar Prime, the player base started to panic buy them, causing its price to go from $15 all the way to $45, making it the most expensive single card at the time. And people were calling for it to get banned, or get Lost World banned, since Call of Legends was about to release, and this was a completely one-sided way to play the game, since all you had to do was get your head down and play this mini game of getting cards in your opponent's lost zone. You didn't really care what they had in the way. And it was looking bad for the player base as Call of Legends released and no bans were in sight, so everyone either panicked or bought some Gengars to join the horde. Except the archetype completely flopped, because it turns out relying on your opponent having Pokemon in their hand was a terrible strategy, because they could easily play around it, especially when your attacker was a stage 2 Pokemon as well. And the archetype did exactly nothing for the metagame, and it died off very fast, resulting in the biggest flop in Pokemon history. If you like that video and you made it to the end, please like the video. It really helps me out. This video took a long time to make, so all support is appreciated. And hit the subscribe button if you want to see more historic Pokemon TCG content. And while you're here, why don't you watch this video here where we talk about the most unbelievable moments caught on a Pokemon TCG livestream.